Hello and welcome to week 13 in Statistics for Psychology. And we move away now from, well, not really, from t-test. We're going to return to t-test here as part of our assignment, but we move into analysis of variance, or ANOVA. Now, the ANOVA test is used to determine if there's something going on. We then have to follow up the ANOVA test with other t-tests, and I'm going to explain that. So the ANOVA comes in when, let's say we've been talking about two variables all this time. What's the relationship between the independent variable and the dependent variable? The ANOVA comes in when we have different levels. In the one-way ANOVA is when one of those variables has different levels. So in a previous assignment, we talked about two types of sharks. We talked about Atlantic sharks and we talked about Pacific sharks. And we made, is there a significant size difference between those? But there are more oceans than two. So if we go above two, it enters in the use of the ANOVA, and in this case the one-way ANOVA, where one variable has multiple, it has, Pacific, Atlantic, Indian, Arctic, and Antarctic. I'm building this explanation on the assignment that you have to do. So you want to compare sharks between all those. Now the quick and dirty to do is to do an ANOVA. An ANOVA does not compare means. It's an analysis of the variance. It's a different type of test. It analyzes the variance across all the groups at the same time to determine somewhere in there, are we seeing trends that would lead to the, yes, there is a relationship between which ocean the shark is in and their size. So we conduct an ANOVA, which takes into consideration all of those figures at the same time. If it says there's no significant presence of that variance that we would be looking at, then our job is done. We don't have to go any further than that. If, however, the ANOVA reveals in its one score that yes, there is something going on here, we then begin to take the next steps. What they're called is post hoc, after the experiment. And we've done this analysis of variance, and it's given us a one-shot, yep, there's something going on, now we need to go find it, and we have to conduct all the individual t-tests between each pair. So in this case, we would have to compare Pacific to Atlantic, Pacific to Indian, Pacific to Arctic, Pacific to Antarctic, Atlantic to Indian, Atlantic to Arctic, Atlantic to Antarctic, Indian to Arctic, Indian to Antarctic, and Arctic to Antarctic. You have to do all those t-tests. But realize we do the ANOVA because if there's nothing's there, we don't have to do all those t-tests. But if the ANOVA tells us that there's something going on in there, then we then take the step to just do each one of the t-tests. Each one of them, we take those comparing different sets of two. Those t-tests are called post hoc t-tests. In this case, they would be independent sample t-tests. We compare all of those. And the data I've given you does reveal, your ANOVA is going to be, it's going to reveal that there is something going on in there, and you will then find where those are in the data by determining which of the individual pairs is actually significantly different from its other pair. So looking for those. So that is the purpose of the ANOVA. It's almost like I got all my data, I have a variable where there's more than two levels of it, and I want to just see if something's going on. So I do an ANOVA, and if the answer is yes, if the actual ANOVA is significant, at that point, I then, okay, more work to do. I then go through each one of the t-tests after. It's a time-saving device for people who are looking at lots of data, people who are doing research all the time, that they're doing ANOVAs, that they're looking for, across. Sometimes you have maybe hundreds of variables. And they can do sets of ANOVAs to kind of narrow it down. All these sort of ways that we might look at saving work, and the ANOVA itself is a good time saver. We do express it when we're talking about using an ANOVA in the literature. There is an expression of the ANOVA. It is oftentimes then followed by additional statistical tests. So the discussion for this week is to look and find an article that uses ANOVA. In your discussion of that article, I want you to talk about the ANOVA, how does it report it, and then what other tests do they do after that, if any. It is perfectly possible that someone could do an ANOVA and then they push off they say, yep, there's something going on, and they end the article with that as an analysis of this. Yes, there is something going on, and somebody needs to pick up this baton and keep on going. Or the researcher's going to follow up with another article to talk about each one of the relationships that they find. It's kind of a good way to get a whole lot of published articles out of just one study, looking at each one of the individual differences after. So tools that people use to find out if something's going on, and then they can publish further on those individual relationships. So the discussion is to find that article, find an article that involves using an ANOVA. Now, the data that is available for this particular assignment is in the last page of your course book. It's page 255. Looks like this. So here we have a sample of sharks in each one of the oceans. You need to replicate this table carefully in Excel, conduct the ANOVA across all of them. That gives you your first statistic. You're creating the title page. Let's see, I got this in my notes here. So you have the title page, then your next tab would be the data, and then a text box with the general hypotheses, meaning there is a difference between these oceans or there's not a difference between these oceans, not the individual t-test ones. Those are, you could actually have another set of hypotheses for these. You'd have those. And on that data, I want you to include the hypotheses, the results of your ANOVA, the results of the individual t-tests, meaning what was the t-score and significance, and conclusions on your hypothesis based on is there a difference between these oceans? That's your major hypotheses. Then you're going to follow up with individual t-tests. In those areas, you're going to have both the t-test for the individual. Well, actually, first off, it might be good, maybe sequentially, do descriptive statistics on each ocean. Need the descriptive statistics. And then you're going to do a t-test on all those pairs. This is a lot of t-tests. Remember, I went through them. It was like Pacific Atlantic, Pacific Indian, Pacific Arctic, Pacific Antarctic, Atlantic Indian, Atlantic Arctic, Atlantic Antarctic, Indian Arctic, Indian Antarctic, Arctic Antarctic. 10 separate t-tests for each pair. And then you're going to take the results from each one of those. You're going to make a little table on the data page showing the t-test value and whether it was significant or not. And from that table, you're going to draw final conclusions on your hypothesis. Is there a difference between the shark sizes in different oceans? Is there or is there not? I'm going to give you a clue. There is, because I built this data to do that. And there is, so you ultimately know where this is going to go. What I'm looking for is the successful capture of the ANOVA, the descriptive statistics of each one of the oceans and of the sharks in the oceans, and a successful 10 successful t-tests that you would conduct to determine which ones are significantly different from each other, and dive deep into that area. You'll see, and just as a preview, this is almost exactly what we're going to be doing next week, except next week is a two-way ANOVA where not only one variable has multiple levels, but the dependent variable has multiple levels. So we have a test to kind of generically look at that. And then we're going into a completely different world of tests, and that is the chi-square test, which we're going to move through that one together because that is actually a test that I'm still grappling with my mind, but it's a way that we deal with nominal data. We have been dealing with numbers all this time, but how do you actually compare apples and oranges? That's the chi-square test. Now, don't go there yet. We're in the ANOVA. We're in the one-way ANOVA where only one variable has multiple levels, and in this particular case, that is the shark sizes in 5 different oceans. I'm looking for the title page, hypotheses, the data, the descriptive data on each ocean and the sharks in it, and the individual t-tests to determine which are different from each other. Now, those t-tests will be, of course, independent samples t-tests because we're looking at different oceans, all those pairs. So I hope you can see that this is kind of a mechanical, repetitive sort of exercise in statistics. So you'll be doing all 10 of those individual t-tests. Present them in your spreadsheet logically. When I do my masters for these and stuff, when I do the master document for this, I put every test in a different tab. And I label the tab on the bottom. So I have, title page, data, descriptive statistics Pacific, descriptive statistics Atlantic, descriptive, each one of those, and then each one of the 10 t-tests. It makes for a huge spreadsheet, but it kind of makes for a really cool layout, and it's easy to understand and navigate through that. So I encourage you to do that. So this week, Chapter 13, One-Way ANOVA, the discussion, finding an article, and talking about the use of the ANOVA and then any post hoc test that they may or may not have done in that article. And then we have the assignments. We're going to look at sharks again across different oceans as an example of how we use the ANOVA to see that, yes, something's going on, and how we use post hoc tests, in this case, independent samples t-tests, to determine where those significant relationships are. So that's what we're looking at this week. Be well. The end is near. Well, the end of the semester is near. And so be well, and I will see you next time.